Hello and welcome to everyone. And I'm Leonardo McClarty, President of the Howard County Chamber, and we'll be getting started with our program in just a moment here. Well, good afternoon once again. Leonardo McClarty with the Howard County Chamber, and excited to kick off our 2020 Cyber Risk Management Series. We have got a great panel that has been assembled here with, I think, some serious cyber experts, both coming from many different perspectives in terms of the local government scene, certainly the federal government, as well as from private practice on a consultancy manner as well. And so, again, really looking forward to the conversation that we'll have this afternoon. First, just a little bit of information just in terms of how we got here. The cyber conference was something that typically the Chamber puts on each year, that this year would have been actually our 12th year in hosting an annual cyber conference. But certainly as COVID-19 has impacted a number of things in our daily lives, it has impacted our ability to gather in a more formal conference. And so with our great planning committee, we've pivoted and will now be doing a series of cyber conversations over the next several months, with, of course, the first one being today. And so with that,
I think Leonardo just froze. And the rest of the participants and I are still in there, so I guess I'll take over for Leonardo as he comes back in, as he's frozen. So everyone out there, I'm Lieutenant Colonel John Agnello. I'm from the United States Cyber Command. I'm the chief of the analytics branch in Applied Research and Development Directorate. And I'm the moderator for today's panel discussion. Our focus area today is the security of critical infrastructure. This webinar series that Leonardo spoke of, the focus area of the entire of the series is risk management. We're focusing this one specifically on security of critical infrastructure. We brought you together with three outstanding panelists to discuss this topic. First one I want to pitch over to Lucy from Red Hat to give her, as the premier sponsor of this event, to kind of give a little rundown of what Red Hat is and what they can do. Go ahead, Lucy.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Lucy Kerner. I lead the technical and go-to-market strategy and thought leadership for security across Red Hat's entire portfolio globally. So what I wanted to do, just spend a few minutes, maybe 3 to 5 minutes, talking to you about who Red Hat is and how we approach security. And then during the panel later on, I'll talk about how our enterprise customers are securing critical infrastructure in this time of COVID, and then also some examples of how we help them. So to start, who is Red Hat? We're the world's leading provider of enterprise open source solutions. We act as, you can think of us as like the insurance company in terms of and trusted open source advisor for enterprises to consume open source technologies securely. So the idea is that instead of consuming upstream open source technologies directly themselves, we help enterprises minimize that risk, since we're the ones who are developing, curating, testing, hardening community upstream open source software to deliver enterprise-ready certified open source, both infrastructure software and application development solutions with a documented, reproducible supply chain. Many people know when they hear Red Hat, they think of Linux. Yeah, and while yes, we do, of course, we're leaders in Linux, but in addition to Linux, we have open source infrastructure, software, application development solutions, cloud container Kubernetes technologies, and also entire suite of automation and management technologies as well. And then all of that can be run on top of a hybrid environment consisting of bare metal, virtual, private, and public cloud. So we give our customers that flexibility, that choice, while still taking advantage of the innovation that is in the upstream open source. So at Red Hat, we view security as a continuous and holistic process, and to help our customers build security into applications, deploy applications onto a hardened platform, and then manage, automate, and adapt their infrastructure and applications as their security and compliance requirements change. We're seeing a lot of our customers implement a consistent automation strategy across infrastructure operations, security operations, application development to improve security and compliance with that repeatability and consistency, especially as they are taking that baby step move to the cloud and towards DevSecOps. In addition to having enterprise open source technologies, we help our customers address the skills of talent gap challenges and help our organization scale by helping to address the people and process challenges with our consulting services, training, and support. So that's what I had.
Thanks, Lucy. So there's Leonardo just came back on there. I don't know if Leonardo, if you had anything else you wanted to add before I officially introduce the panelists here and the abstract of the panel, and then start the discussion. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yes, and one, I want to apologize. Interestingly enough, I had some technical difficulties in that my computer just decided it would take a nap on me and shut down. And so, had to pivot here. But again, my apologies, but certainly it's always good to have capable assistants and people to take over. And so thank you, John, for that. But I wanted to just also acknowledge our cyber risk management series sponsors. And so certainly you just heard from Lucy Kerner from Red Hat sharing about their capabilities. And this is their actual third year in being our premier sponsor. But also want to thank our tier 2 sponsors in Howard Hughes, SparkSoft, and Edwards Performance Solutions. Our tier 3 sponsors in Uninet, Tower Federal Credit Union, and BTS Software. And in particular, BTS Software is actually, when they're featured as a tier 3, they're actually our technology sponsor in the sense of making the platform that we have here available today, as well as also we will be recording today's webinar also and making it available to attendees as well. Our tier 4 sponsors in Aronson, Rebel Haiku, and the Economic Development Authority of Howard County. And then lastly, our tier 5 sponsors in Prescott HR, Creatrix, T-Secure, and Phoenix TS, and Polera Matza. And so again, we have some great supporters of this series, and so want to make sure that we thank them for all that they're doing to support the Howard County Chamber and our GovConnects program. And so with that, I'm going to turn things back over to John to introduce our panel and to share a little bit about his background as well. So I guess I'll say the screen is yours.
Okay. So I briefly introduced myself already that, I'm from United States Cyber Command. I'm Lieutenant Colonel John Agnello, as I said before, and our 3 distinct panelists that we have here. So to start with, I want to give just a little abstract of what this conference specifically is about. Critical infrastructure has always been a target for hackers, domestic and international. And the cybersecurity aspect of our critical infrastructure is key to the safety of our power grids, water purification, sewer treatment, and everyday life. In many locations across the country, our critical infrastructure is maintained on closed networks, or with minimal paths to the open internet. In today's society, and specifically today's pandemic society, our networks and critical cybersecurity professionals are working in a very remote-based world. This panel discussion will explore how companies, municipalities, and other organizations will work to maintain the cybersecurity of our critical infrastructure while working in a predominantly remote and telecommuting environment. With that, Lucy already kind of gave her pitch of Red Hat, so let me introduce Lucy first, and she can kind of give just I know she kind of already gave an introduction, but if there's anything else she'd like to add as her introduction, and also any opening remarks that she'd like to throw out there. Lucy, you're on mute right now.
Sorry about that. Okay, so as I said, at Red Hat, I lead technical go-to-market strategy and thought leadership for security across Red Hat's entire portfolio globally. So what that means is, creating internal, external content, delivering that to the field customers, our partners, analysts, and press. I also do a lot of evangelism, speak at a lot of internal conferences, but also external conferences such as RSA. Been at Red Hat a little over 6 years. Before my current role, I was a senior cloud solutions architect for US public sector at Red Hat. So I working with them to, as our government agencies were moving to the cloud and working with them on their security challenges. And then prior to that, I was working on various aspects of security in pre-sales technical roles, but also in software engineering and hardware engineering too. Yeah, so that's basically my short summary.
Thanks a lot, Lucy. So we're bringing in the industry there with Red Hat and Lucy. Let's go into local municipalities. I'll talk to Brandy, introduce yourself, and any opening remarks would you like to go?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brandy Gans. I am the Chief Information Officer for Howard County Government. At Howard County Government, there are an array of services that we do within IT that aren't just your typical the typical IT that you would think of. So we manage the network as well as we manage all of our servers, we manage all of the endpoints, and we do the maintenance on all of our endpoints. And then we also have a records management team who does the scanning of documents. We have the radio team who does the installation of the radios within the cop cars and everywhere within the county, as well as we have a public safety team. So we also work on a variety of things involved with public safety to help maintain and ensure that our public safety systems are secure at all times. In addition, we also have a project management office that oversees all of the projects within IT. So we work on anything and everything related to IT, and that includes construction projects as well as many other things. We also have the cable administration team that reports in through IT. So they're responsible for all of the administration of cable throughout the county, and they work with the constituents to ensure that we have Wi-Fi and that we have, everything that they need throughout the county as well. And last but not least, we also have we also run our own fiber throughout the county, so they are also part of the IT group. I'm very happy to be here, and with that, I will turn it back over to John.
Thanks, Brian. I appreciate that. So we go into industry with Lucy, municipalities with Brandy, and then Jerry brings in a diverse mixture of federal government and industry. So Jerry, why don't you introduce yourself and give a little background and any opening comments you'd like to add?
Sure, absolutely. First off, I just want to thank everyone for joining and for the invitation, and I've had the opportunity to speak to everyone. Again, my name is Jerry Davis. I'm the founder of a really small boutique firm called Griffin X. My focus has been largely on applied cybersecurity, and I try to look at things that are what I call over the horizon and trying to apply security in very difficult cases. Some of the work that I'm primarily focused on today is building resilient space systems. And space systems architecture. My background largely from that came from almost a decade at NASA, where I had two different roles. At one point, I was the Global Chief Information Security Officer for NASA out of Washington, D.C. And then another role I spent as the CIO for Angel Research Center, which is here in Silicon Valley, where I'm located. I've also worked in critical infrastructure in the healthcare environment, having been the head of cybersecurity and privacy for Veterans Affairs, Department of Education, and spent a lot of time consulting early in my career, went to the government and then consulting again. So a lot of time in the intelligence community as well as working in financial industries, fintech companies, and that sort of thing that I'm doing today. Critical infrastructure is something that's near and dear to my heart. I'm a fellow with the Institute for Critical Infrastructure Technology, which is based out of Washington, D.C. A little bit over 20 years ago, I remember writing a paper on critical infrastructure protection. If you, some of you may or may not remember the old PDD 63, the Presidential Decision Directive 63, we're talking about protection of critical infrastructure. And that was kind of my foray into looking at critical infrastructure as a part of national infrastructure. So again, I'm really pleased to be a part of this conversation. As I said, it's something that's near and dear to my heart. And with that, I'll turn it back over to John. Thank you.
So Jerry, with the, how I met you was through ICIT as a member there and a participating member for ICIT. And, with your background, your national background of working with NASA and working with VA, things like that, how would you see the security of critical infrastructure changing for the good or for the bad over the past years or decade, specifically in the type of environment we are now, that we are in such a austere environment that we have to do these type of meetings instead of actually meet face to face, actually have to do Zoom meetings and such?
Yeah, one of the things I see that's changing is the awareness around security within the critical infrastructure communities. On the non-public, private side industries, I think the partnership that the U.S. government, in particular DHS and folks at like NIST, the National Institutes for Standards and Technology, has done a phenomenal job in getting the holders and owners of critical infrastructure the awareness around what threats they face and helping them with vulnerability management and things of that nature. The big shift and the big change that I see between the two entities, public and private, one is awareness, and two, people are getting smarter, organizations are getting smarter about not just focusing on the defenses of security, but being very, very smart now about resiliency. And that's one of the things that I preach about, is about resiliency, because at some point, I think we all can agree and understand that a breach is going to happen. It's going to take place, particularly if you have very well-resourced individuals or nation-state organizations. So one of the things that I preach, and one of the things that I'm learning that's going throughout both of the communities and public and private sector, is the aspect of resiliency. How to build resilient systems that can continue on providing the services at the onset or during an event that's disruptive or degrades their services altogether. So I think that resiliency piece is something that I'm seeing that's really, really growing, and people are really embracing that.
Jerry, thanks. Before I switch over to one of the other panelists, I just forgot to add that for any of the participants that are listening into this, on the lower right-hand corner of your screen, you have a question and answer block. And if you have any questions specifically that you'd like to ask any of the panelists, you're welcome to write it in there, and I will go through those and ask those questions to the individual panelists that they were for, general questions or specific question for any of the panelists. With that, Jerry, thanks for the input on that. Kind of pitching off of that, Brandy, I'm interested in your thoughts of, at a local municipality level, how do you see that? Jerry's looking at the strategic level and the national level. How does it affect you and your organization at a local municipality, I think?
Sure. So I've seen things change drastically, and really there's a lot more focus on security right now and making sure that we aren't vulnerable. And we're taking it an opportunity now to do some of the things that maybe we didn't have in place, but now we know they need to be in place. So we're adding on and continuously making changes in order to ensure that everything works and functions the way that it should, especially right now with individuals being and working at home, and there's VPN, there's VDI, there's so many resources and so many ways that people can get into the network, and it's critical that we secure everything as those people come in, to make sure that we're not releasing any types of data and various things. I mean, we really have put a big focus on our data too, to ensure that we are PCI compliant, that we're HIPAA compliant, that that we have all those compliance in place, because during this time, one of the biggest things that we've seen is an increase in phishing and attacks and various ways for people to try to come into the environment. And we want to make sure that everything is secure and no one's able to get to any information. So Yeah, I mean, the biggest impacts for us are we're taking advantage of this to be able to increase and do some things that maybe not, we knew we needed to do but didn't have the time, or it wasn't the primary focus before, but now it certainly is, and it's been a big shift for us.
Interesting. So Lucy, going back and forth between the federal here and the local municipalities and such, and you working in industry, what do you see as the most important aspect of cybersecurity and critical infrastructure from your experience in the different industries that you've been in?
So in the industries that we're seeing, with COVID-19, there is this, some companies have the infrastructure in place to handle the huge increase of remote workers, and some don't, right? So that causes strain on VPNs, et cetera. There's also, Brandy mentioned the phishing and malware. We do hear a lot about that. In uncertain times, people naturally want eager for information, reassurance, right? They're very easy to fall prey to well-crafted phishing email schemes, things like that. Same thing with, all these fake social media accounts popping up. Again, reliance on information and people wanting more information, and they fall vulnerable to these kinds of things. And the idea that these with the increase in VPN and remote users, remote working, there's a lot of unusual access patterns that maybe prior securing critical infrastructure you may not have necessarily been looking for, but now because you didn't really have all these remote access right before, but now there is. So you have to change your the vendors are scrambling to retrain algorithms and redraw baselines to improve identity verification, for example, right? Then the other thing is shadow IT, a lot of bring your own devices. That's also, that's starting to emerge. And the other thing that we're seeing is, that they're trying to just keep the day-to-day operations running, and sometimes security becomes a back burner kind of thing. Like it's not a priority, because there's oh crap, got to deal with all these, increased VPN access, and we got to deal with this, and now security team has to help IT and things like this. So sometimes, and humans are naturally fighting fires instead of necessarily thinking long-term. So they, we also see that that they are the security sometimes is not necessarily always a priority, and it is kind of a back, because they're scrambling. There's not enough people working, or they're not enough staff, not enough resources, staff shortage problems, supply chain disruptions, that kind of thing.
Follow-on question to you, Lucy, on that. You brought up bring your own device. What do you think with bringing BYOD and other things like Internet of Things? How do you think that affects the risk footprint of these organizations, and what are some best practices you think can help reduce that risk?
I think that there is definitely the risk that because industries had to overnight deal with all of these users coming online, right? So many industries. So there is that risk because maybe the enterprise IT teams haven't adapted to deal with all of these BYOD type devices, right? And then you're also dealing with things like home routers and Wi-Fi systems that are lacking advanced security capabilities. Maybe they haven't been patched, since God knows when, right? You're not centralizing in terms of securing all of these random systems that might be out there, right? So, that's definitely a huge challenge, all of the shadow IT that's going on. So I think that, if the IT team could have a better, maybe, have things like, be able to restrict what type of systems can talk to the corporate network, that kind of thing. But again, what I see is that not all organizations have necessarily done that.
Brandy, you like to add something to that, I think?
Lucy couldn't have said it any better. I mean, there's so many things that that I think have changed with that. And so there's a couple things that we did. We developed best practices. We put in things in place for like VDI. Every 4 hours, it will automatically log you out and you have to log back in. We have MFA for, you know, those users that are at home, so that we can control and make sure that if their device is stolen or anything like that, we know that it's them. In addition, we had several people within our office. Most people had desktops. So it was a huge transition for us. And we were scrambling in the beginning, like I think almost everybody else. And we, you know, so we ordered a lot of laptops to be able to deploy to our employees so that they did have those devices at home, because we quickly found out that people had Apple, people had, you know, like Lucy was saying, their internet was slow, you know, various things. And it was very, very hard for us to be able to diagnose some of those problems. So what we did was we tried to deploy as many laptops as we could to individuals. And then we developed a manual that we provided to them of, you know, some best practices when you're working at home, things that you should be looking at. Don't click on links, don't open things, you should be using MFA, all of those types of things.
Funny you say that. So, you know, I work in a very classified environment with U.S. Cyber Command, and just over the last couple of months, they've actually even asked us, you know, which ones of our employees would like to have laptops to bring home, and everyone was like, wait, wait a minute, they want us to bring a computer home and let us log in to do work? How does that work out? Obviously, that's unclassified work at home, not classified work at home, because they discourage that a little bit. Jared, do you have something you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, you know, exceptional points by Brandy and Lucy. I think one of the things I want to touch on for any organization, any company, in particular at my time, I was the global chief security officer for a fairly large semiconductor equipment manufacturing corporation. And one of the areas that I focused on and had the company focus on was preparation, right? You know, a little preparation goes a long way, because, you know, one of the things I learned, and John, this may resonate with you, is that when I was in the Marine Corps, is that we always planned for things to go wrong, because you knew for a fact that they weren't going to go right. So, you know, I think organizations, what they need to look at is creating business continuity plans, because things are going to go wrong. And not just create the plans, but you have to exercise those plans multiple times during the year to make sure that you're prepared for when things like a COVID happens. No one, I think, it could ever predict that COVID would happen and have the impact that it has. But if you're doing your exercises and scenarios correct, and one of the scenarios and exercises that I did with my last firm was an exercise where people couldn't get to the office. We often did exercises around things like earthquakes, because we're in California and we're very earthquake prone. So we do things around like disruptions around earthquakes, but we hadn't done anything around what if people just can't get to the office, and what does that look like? And that opened up our eyes quite a bit, you know, in the CIO's office on what they need to do to prepare, identify what were the essential services and that sort of thing to help run the company and run the operations. And those essential services, did they have the right tools to be able to work remotely, and then the right security around that? So I think business continuity planning, you want to do all that well in advance, because it's a little too late to try to exercise your plan or lack of a plan at the time a disruptive event hits. So I would always focus on preparation upfront and business continuity.
So I think that goes into a nice follow-on. One of the questions we actually got from the audience here says, what types of PSAs can be put out, public or private, so that entities know that our data needs to be secure across platforms and at all levels in communities? I think what they're looking for is basically how do we put out to our own organization and to the public how they can best secure their data. Very, very general question. Anyone want to take that one, I think?
I'll take that one.
Go ahead, Brandy.
So some of the things that we've been doing is every day we have a press release that goes out about COVID-19, and we've been making recommendations. We also have been putting out information about like where we have Wi-Fi, where we have where we can get public who does not have access to internet or things like that, where they can come, where they can get access. And then we also did something where we developed a VDAC, which is our Virtual Disaster Assistance Center. And it's online, and it allows our residents, they can come to our portal and they're taken directly to this assistance center, and you can type in the word, and it pulls up all the documentation related to whatever they're looking for, whether it's food assistance, whether it's tax assistance, whether it's housing assistance, whatever they need. And we put all that information into one place to make it easy for them to find. We made a call center so that when individuals call in who aren't able, maybe they don't have access to the internet or access to be able to get to the documentation, we've created a call center with hunt groups, and we go through various people in order to make sure that we were answering questions of the public as quickly as we could.
I was also
going to
that. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Lucy. I'm sorry.
I was going to say that security awareness training that we talked about, that Brandy talked about, is definitely very important. I think enforcing not only about the phishing emails that potential those that may be coming through, don't just click anything blindly, right? But also, what are some of these cyber threats that you're seeing in during these COVID-19 times? What's the potential impact to the organization? What can you take to mitigate the risk? And then that kind of training should be available online in a formal online training course that is developed where employees are kind of mandated to take that, and then have that constant communication to the staff, from direct managers as well.
Yeah, and finally, John, I would just add that again, as it relates to preparation and continuity of operations, communications, the communications organization, whatever that may be within a firm, is an essential part of, obviously, a part of a business continuity plan and execution of that plan. And so what I've seen, and one of the things I've done in private industry for the organization, is work with, tie myself to the hip of the comms people. And so anytime we would see anything from the security side, that information needed to get out, we work very closely with the folks in communications to get messages out. And we use different avenues to get the messages out, because you have some folks, the majority do have internet connection, but you do have the lowest common denominator that don't have things like internet connections, that sort of thing. So we use things like SMS pushes, different other avenues just to get messages out to people, particularly if we're seeing a spike in something like phishing attempts. When we get those messages out to the folks in communications, help them draft the message, and then they would push it out to the various vehicles that they had to reach as big of a population as we could. And in reaching that population, one of the things that we did, is purely voluntary, is that we asked employees for their non-work, cell phone numbers and that sort of thing, to be able to push messages to them. And so people opt into that. And so we use multiple communication strings. We use things like the phone system. People had a number they could dial in and listen to the updates of the day, and it included security issues and things like that to be aware of.
Nice. There's a couple of questions from the audience, but I kind of wanted to throw one out first. One of the things you had said earlier, I think Jerry, you're the one that talked about it, was you see organizations working much more closer together in this type of environment, government space and in commercial space, working closer together to make the industry more secure, critical infrastructure more secure. I guess one of the questions, I kind of wanted to pitch this one to Lucy to start with. How do you see with senior executives or commercial businesses, how do you motivate the leaders there in the commercial industry to actually have them, work closely with, local or regional or national level, critical infrastructures on the security aspects of those organizations.
So when you say how do we motivate them? Can you rephrase that? What do you mean by that?
I guess my question is, when you're working in an industry, how does it? What would make I guess when you work in government, our motivator is, we want to do things good for the government. We want to do good things for the America. Red, white, and blue. Wave the flag. Be happy. Got my Army coffee mug. All that kind of good stuff. We all get paid a flat rate no matter what. I guess in industry, it's the bottom line is what's most important. How do you get a corporation to buy into, if it's not going to be the best for the bottom line, how do you get them to work with local or federal governments to, better security? For instance, if it is critical infrastructure, if your organization has something that can help secure, our power grid, our water grid, whatever it may be, how do you get them to actually understand that, money is not the most important thing, I guess is the best way to say it.
I think when they kind of all come together, it may be, for example, at conferences, or sometimes we hold especially invited executive briefings where we bring in senior level executives from different industries, not just financial sector, but also from the government, from healthcare and security conscious industries, and bring them together to talk about these types of issues, like these types of challenges. And then they almost convince themselves, right? They say, oh, this is what we are seeing. This is how we solved it. And then we see them talk and say, okay, oh, I didn't know that was a problem. And then, that kind of thing. So that's one of the ways that that definitely resonates with them, versus us trying to pitch something. It's much more convincing if they hear from their own peers and convinced kind of from their own peers, because whether it's financial sector or public sector or healthcare, they have similar challenges when it comes to security and what they have to do for securing critical infrastructure. So that really resonates when they can talk to their peers about that.
Randy, what do you think from the other side? What's your take on it, coming from actually working in local municipality type aspect?
I think maybe it's a little bit easier here because we're able to effectively communicate up and say, these are the critical pieces that we need to be working on, and this is why we need to be working on it, and this is what we need to do, and we need to catch up with the private industry, and we need to be doing these things, and we need to be doing those things because the private industry is doing it, and we know that the trends are going that way. And we want to make sure that, we're securing all of our critical infrastructure because we see that the targets happen there, and then we don't want them to happen at the government level. So those are good ways for us to be able to talk and motivate and talk to leadership and things like that, and let them know that, we certainly don't want any kind of attack on the government. So
I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add, Jerry, or go to the next question.
Yeah, just really quick, from the private sector side, you're absolutely right, John. Yeah, at the end of the day, it's dollars and cents. It's the bottom line, all right? And so I always approach it from a perspective of enterprise risk management. So we roll in security, cybersecurity into the overall organization enterprise risk management schema, and you have to talk to them in the language and the context of things that they understand to get them motivated. One of the things that every corporation understands is money, right? And so the way I've gotten organizations to kind of move forward and invest in, whether it was people or technology and things of that nature, is to give them the context around operations. So the semiconductor equipment manufacturer, we manufactured equipment for building semiconductors chips. Well, I call those widgets. And so the way I present it to the leadership, is that if what is the impact if we can't produce our widget? All right, there's a significant financial impact to shareholders and things of that nature. So that gets their attention. Get their attention by saying, okay, and here are the areas with insecurity where we have gaps and issues that can potentially impact our ability to create our widgets. And I did that in a whole risk management schema. I give them what are the threats we're dealing with, what are our exposures, and then give them the probability of this taking place, and then what we stand to lose as it relates to our risk tolerance. The company already had a risk tolerance in terms of what they were willing to lose from a dollars and cents amount over time. So if I could bring that all together and said, hey, this particular issue that we have from a risk perspective is going to exceed our dollar threshold that you're willing to deal, it's going to exceed that. That gets their attention, because now you're putting it in dollars and cents, you're putting it in real risk terms and probability terms. And that always seems to get them moving. But it's a constant dialogue and a constant conversation that you need to have. I always say, security people, you need to be really good marketeers and really good salespeople at the same time.
Nice. So I wanted to kind of go to one of the questions that actually came from the audience. This is directed directly to you, Jerry. It says, you mentioned that you feel awareness across the industry dealing with critical infrastructure, ICS SCADA, has grown. Other than the sheer volume in which cyber attacks are happening against organizations, what indicators show that across that industry A, they're more aware of the dangers they face? B, are there any really clear indicators that changes are being implemented? So I guess, what are some of the indicators, and how do we see that there's actually a change in those indicators?
Yeah. So what I saw in particular in the federal government space, it was pretty straightforward, right? Because whether it's DHS or DOD, they're creating those, whether intel reports or for official use only reports, and they're giving those to the agencies that have a concern or work with ICS or OT environments. And so we see that awareness growing. We see there was a number of initiatives that were taking place. In particular, NASA, we took an initiative to improve our posture around OT and ICS systems, because again, when you look at NASA and you look at a space launch and you look at the launch tower, there's a whole bunch of ICS and industrial control systems and SCADA systems that's connected to that environment. And so as the reporting is coming out, we're getting things from the intel community that draws awareness, and that's pushing to make things happen. It's a little different on the private industry side. I know me personally, when I was in private industry working for a large firm, $11 billion manufacturing firm, I had to be the person that brought the data to the organization. And then I was involved in a number of various public sector, private sector industry groups, and all of the these private industries were very well aware of it. One of the groups that I was a part of was DHS's their critical infrastructure, their sector coordinating council meetings, and you had every organization I can think of known to mankind in critical infrastructure, private companies in these meetings. They were very well aware of what was going on. Getting an organization to actually implement and reduce their risk around ICS and OT environment, that's a different story. In my last conversation, I talked about how I did it from a risk perspective, but that's only my position as it relates to indication that they're actually doing something. It would be individual companies that you talk to, whether they're chief security officers, they would have to give that dialogue and that narrative of how it works within their companies. But I do know for a fact, when I sat on the sector coordinating council with DHS, public-private, there were hundreds of publicly or privately private companies, publicly traded, that sat in these meetings, and we're getting a lot of information from DHS and the intelligence community about their environment. So they're very well aware. How good they are at implementing controls, that's up to the individual companies. I know we push really hard to accompany that out with them.
Randy, Lucy, you have anything you guys want to add to that, you think, or no?
Not me specifically.
Fair enough. Okay. I guess one of the things that follow up, I think Brandy actually was the one that said this earlier. I don't remember, but interesting trends of today. So, Lucy, I kind of want to pitch this to you. Where do you see the trends in our industry going, specifically in risk management? When we're talking risk management of cybersecurity, where do you see the trends in the industry actually going today?
So I kind of see just enterprises in general, like they're looking to transform how they do, they want to develop their business applications faster. They want to be able to go to the cloud and not have to manage their own data centers, that kind of thing. But of course, with being security in mind, and also being able to pass all of their compliance audits and things like this. They are looking at lots of different technologies from of course the public clouds like AWS, Azure, Google, but also how can I do this using also my on-premise environment and being able to span across these environments, public, private, and on-premise cloud, using technologies like containers and Kubernetes, and then changing how you do application development, taking advantage of this change in infrastructure, and then doing things like DevSecOps, where you are changing how you do application development, almost creating a factory with a pipeline, with a factory that you are creating applications in this pipeline, where in this pipeline you are creating applications. All your security tools are part of it. Your documentation for security plans are part of that, right? So we're seeing this kind of evolution in general for enterprises. But what's also interesting is that the security tools vendors are evolving as well, in terms of, you see a lot of new kind of security vendors coming up for container security tools vendors, or vendors are specific for Kubernetes security, or Prisma, who's like doing Palo Alto with that acquisition. They have Prisma, right? That's looking at how do I secure from public cloud, private cloud, and also across multiple different public clouds, right? So these kinds of things, and also this kind of blur between, what can I do natively within my container platform or within natively in AWS, and when do I actually need to buy a tool? And so I have a kind of interesting story with this one. When I was at AWS Reinforce, that's AWS's first security conference last year, and I was having dinner with various different security vendors, and this is when AWS came out with their Security Hub product. And some vendors were like, I cannot believe this. This is directly competes with us, right? So you see this blur as well. And this confusion, and the security team's always behind too. Like they don't necessarily are up to date on all of these different security tools. Like they're like, okay, what do you mean I can't use my legacy security firewall thing that I've been using that on this new cloud fancy container thing, right? They don't understand that, and so that evolving in terms of like cross training between staff is also between security teams and between operations and between development teams. Like that's also really important. So it's like a culture shift as well, is what we're also seeing.
It's funny you start talking about the security concerns of containerization, and I feel like you've been sitting in the meetings that I've been in my office for the last 5 months. That's what we do every day now, is trying to convince the people that are actual data owners that when my guys are developing something and it's in a container, You know, just trust my black box. Trust me, it's secure. You know, we've been doing security controls the entire time. Trust us. For some reason, the people that actually have to validate it and say the network is secure don't like that for some reason. I don't know why. Randy, what do you want to add to that?
So some of the things that we've really seen trends in are GRC, governance risk compliance. I mean, you know, and moving and making sure that we are following the correct standards, that we do know what NIST is saying, that, you know, we're applying everything effectively within our environment. As well as we've seen a huge shift from traditional waterfall project management to agile project management, so that we really do build upon we're getting things out so much faster and quicker to our end users and to our community as a whole. And then the last thing that we really have a huge focus on is data analytics, and like capturing and looking at all of that data. And it's not a lack of data. It's a lack of knowing what to do with the data and how to analyze that data and how to bring it all together and, you know, really make sure that everything points in the correct direction and you are producing everything that you should be from a standpoint of what the public is asking you and things like that.
I feel like you read my bio. That's my job. Jerry, you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, you know, a couple of things that I see that's emerging, particularly in your larger organizations, is the convergence of security across cybersecurity, physical security, and then business continuity and personnel security into these entities now that we call GSOCs, these global security operations centers. It used to be that, you know, the security operations center was very organic to just IT security, right? And network security and things like that, and nodes. I'm seeing organizations and companies, and it's one of the things that I push forward organizations is to consolidate your functions, and particularly those operational technology and monitoring of operational technology and industrial control systems into a centralized place where your IT folks are, and also the physical security and your business continuity folks have views into. What I try to create, and again, I'm going to use a military term, John, you understand, was I try to create what I call the common operating picture, where we can see from a security perspective globally what was taking place at any one of our sites anywhere in the world, whether it was IT focused or industrial control system focused, what was taking place in one environment. And by having business continuity have a view into that, they could understand whether or not what we were about to deal with and were we properly ready to deal with that. That's one of the things that I see that's changing, is this consolidation, convergence of security with operational security aspects. Underneath that, wanted to support pieces of technology that I see many companies moving towards. It's a buzzword, you hear it all the time. It's called SOAR, Security Orchestration, Automation, and Response, is a key component to common operating picture, because that's where the data analytics come in. All your data comes in from all your devices and things that are taking place, events, into a data lake. And then there are automation that takes place, and you have these playbooks that kick off different response activities and takes that load off of the analyst by doing it in an automated fashion. So I see more companies moving towards SOAR in their security environments, and particularly under those GSOC environments.
Actually, one of my team actually has just developed a nice new SOAR tool, which actually works really well. We have a few questions from the audience here. There's a couple of them that are cloud related. So I've got a question, open it to the panel here. This one's from John here. How would you approach securing critical infrastructure hosted in the cloud by providers who are sharing little to no information about their security controls? I'll throw that to all the panel, because I actually like that question a lot.
Yeah, you know, I'll take a stab at it from the guy when I was, you know, wearing my federal government hat. It all comes down to T's and C's, right? The terms and conditions that you had in those contracts, right? You have to write very well written contracts about, you know, whether they're service level agreements, data ownership, and insight into the controls that providers or cloud providers are giving you. The good thing about the government today, the federal government, is that if you're going to use a cloud service provider, it has to be FedRAMP certified, right? And so that FedRAMP certification gives you insight into their controls. Short of having a FedRAMP, using a FedRAMP certified environment, and you've been entered into a contractual agreement, it's going to be really, really hard to get those controls out of that company, so where you can review them and understand how they're properly protecting their side of the system. But it all starts with good writing of contracts, and if you're not getting what you need, it's time to go back to the table and rewrite that contract, make an addendum or something like that. That's the way I would deal with and approach it.
Yeah, and I was going to add that definitely the big three, right? The cloud providers, they all have FedRAMP, right? At least like Amazon has FedRAMP High, so does Azure, right? So that's one thing. And they're also very clear about shared responsibility. Like you go to any Amazon conference, their first slide is shared responsibility. We are not responsible for this. You're responsible for this, right? So that makes it really clear in terms of, where your responsibility lies in terms of the security controls as well.
Good point.
So we have a cloud provider survey that we put out to anybody that we're doing business with that is in the cloud, where we make them fill out this questionnaire and asks various questions about where the data is housed, whether it's in encrypted in transit, several things. And then once we get that information back, if there's something that fills our requirements, we talk with the vendor, but then we also put it out to our department or whomever's asking for this as a risk and say, hey, we're unable to receive this information, or are you willing to accept the risk of the fact that this, they're not FedRAMP or they're not this or they're not that, to work with them, but, letting them be aware of the whole situation, I think helps too.
I think a follow-on to that, another question out there was, with everything moving to team collaboration in the cloud, how can we know which cloud solutions are actually secure, specifically for teams that focus on data and analytics and confidential information? Kind of a follow-on to that, if anyone want to add just a little more detail to what we just talked about.
Well, they're meeting a minimum level of security if they're FedRAMP, FedRAMP provider or certified. I would say one of the things that we have to do is put together, and Randy alluded to this a little bit, is put together a third-party supplier assessment, security assessment program. And it's basically just a checklist, a small checklist of security controls that you want to go and, for lack of a better term, kind of audit, see if they have those in place for you, and that they're doing their side of the job. As a whether it was in the government or even in private industry, we did just that. We went out and our third-party suppliers, we would go out and run a pretty comprehensive security assessment, and our customers would do the same thing to us. Our customers would come to our company and they would send out members from their security team or internal audit team, and they would go through from tooth to tail on our security program and what we were doing to protect their very, very sensitive information. So I think a third-party supplier program with some simple checklists and things that you can get from the federal government, like NIST and that sort of thing, they have those things out there, go a long way in helping you manage and determining the risk around third-party suppliers.
Also, I was going to add that many of these cloud service providers, they have, on their website, they'll say, we have the following, compliance or compliant to the following compliance standards, ISO, SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3, et cetera, RAMP, et cetera. And then you can click and then, you can find out which services specifically comply to that, right? That kind of thing. That's one thing. And then many of our customers, for example, do in either internal pen testing or hire external to do external pen testing as well.
Okay, there's another question out here. Is it appropriate for surveying platforms to charge an additional cost to ensure HIPAA and FERPA compliant security? In this day and age, shouldn't those types of securities be incorporated in those platforms? What do y'all think about that? And it's looking specifically for, if there's HIPAA requirements, should organizations or platforms charge an additional fee to meet those compliance, or should that just be incorporated into the actual software itself?
I think if the software is healthcare, HIPAA for healthcare related, potentially it might make sense to have that compliance kind of already built in terms of like it comes, with that compliance, especially if it's a cloud service, or some sort of service, or the entire like a cloud hosted service, for example. But if it's not, the enterprise may not be, if they're not necessarily in a healthcare industry, then I don't know if it makes sense for HIPAA, for example.
So we have a ton of HIPAA stuff because we work with health departments. We have a ton of HIPAA. We have a ton of FERPA. I have PCI. I have PII. All of that. So any vendor that I work with, those are all standard questions that we ask. And even from a PCI compliance standpoint, I'll ask for their certification so that I can see what level, what level they are and things like that. So it would be great if all companies did set those bars as a standard, but I don't know. I don't know that you can ask everybody to do that at this point, but I think it would be, I think it would definitely be something that we should strive for.
Yeah, and I agree with Brandy. I think if I'm in an organization and we're healthcare, let's say healthcare focused, like VA, when I was at VA, a lot of HIPAA requirements, we fell under HITECH Act, all those kind of things. That's the first question I'm going to ask a provider, are you HIPAA compliant? And if they're like, no, but we can, for an additional charge, put in those controls or whatever, I'm probably going to go somewhere else. I'm probably going to look for someone that already has experience doing that. I'm not going to take the chance that someone's going to, become compliant and charge me for that. If you're in a space of being a provider to healthcare environments and that sort of thing, whatever the environment is, you should already kind of, in my mind, kind of homegrown organically, have the controls and meet the compliance requirements for things like HIPAA.
So I get a few more questions left for the panel. One of the ones I really wanted to get to was with the pending election coming up in a few months from now. We're talking critical infrastructure. We're talking about election infrastructure. What do you all think could be done at the local, state, federal, and industry level to reduce or manage the risk to the actual election infrastructure? Open that to the panel.
I'll take that one. So one of the things that we most recently did was we actually are streaming everything. We had an election in the beginning of June, our primary, and we streamed it all so that everybody could see everything that was happening and everything that was being done in the room. And then we had, cameras all around, and we actually had a box that focused in on to make sure that the ballot was filled out so that you couldn't see any confidential information, but you could see that the ballot was filled out correctly, as well as we put up cameras at the mailboxes around so that we could see people putting in all of their documentation. I mean, I think it's definitely a changing time in trying to make sure, and we don't have the ability to have a bunch of people be in there at one time, and we have to be creative and think of various ways. I mean, we streamed it on YouTube the whole time so that everybody could see everything that was happening in the room.
I would say, you go back to the basics, John, and the basis of things, like I say, like within the environment itself where the voting is taking place, and then afterwards, after the polls have closed, it's the basis of things like access controls. who has access to the data that's on the machine? Are you enforcing things like least privilege, right? Give people the amount of access that they need to perform their jobs and no more. I think one of the other big pieces that local municipalities and governments can do is, if they're using electronic voting machines, really understand what the security is, what are security features of that technology that you are using. I learned a long time ago that we hear people all the time talk about the internet is really insecure, but the internet wasn't designed with security in mind. It assumed that the endpoints were secure, and so I think the question has to be raised and asked from local governments. The technology they're using, how are they assured that the technology has the proper level of security built in, designed in, and what assurances can those providers give to the local government to that fact? So good product selection, make sure they really understand the security, and then again, going back to the basics around things like least privileges, access controls, so on and so forth.
Yeah, and I would say, making sure that they are, those systems are patched, and like you said, making sure that the access control is set in place, and monitoring all of that you have the monitoring that monitoring and reporting is set in place as well.
There's an outstanding organization that Cyber Command sponsors in Howard County called Dreamport, if any of you are familiar with it. It's kind of an incubator, such kind of thing that Cyber Command supports. And actually, just recently, they did a election security rapid prototyping event type of thing, and they actually basically hacked the election machine. And we realized where there's a lot of the security concerns are with those things, and it's pretty interesting to find out what came out of that. I got one last open-ended question that I want to give each of the panelists and have them answer the question, and then give any final closing remarks to each after they answer the question. Very, very general, open questions. What do you think are the biggest challenges in our field right now when it comes to risk management and cybersecurity, specifically in critical infrastructure, but you can go as general as you'd like. I'll start with Brandy. Go ahead.
Biggest challenge as well. So some of our biggest challenges is definitely the infrastructure. I mean, it's what people have in their hands and what they are using and how they're connecting into our network. I know I talked about it a little bit before, but we really are trying to get everybody laptops and make sure that they are connecting securely into our environment. We worked with everyone. We separated people out into groups as to how they would come into our environment, whether it was through VDI, whether it was through a remote desktop, whether it was through VPN, and it was based upon their applications and what they needed access to. So, we looked at each individual and tried to divide it up so that we didn't have everybody coming in all through one path, and we weren't as vulnerable in certain places. We increased our bandwidth. We did various things in order to make sure that we could handle that traffic that was coming in. I mean, we just ran a report recently about trying to find out, when our highest traffic was, because we were going to make a change. Our highest traffic was at 2 a.m. in the morning. And, it's like, wow, you realize that everybody has adjusted and shifted, and, parents are now with their kids during the days. So in the evenings, they're trying to get their work done, and they're trying to do things a little bit differently. And it's us having to adapt and adjust to those types of things and learn how the environment is changing, based upon the different dynamic of people being at home and using all types of different devices. And I mean, one of the things people ask for is, can I take a printer home? Well, my question is, why do you need a printer? What do you need a printer for? Like, we have SharePoint, we have OneDrive, we have all these places where you can store and you can use these documents from there. Why do you need a printer? Oh, well, I have to sign things. Okay, well then we now have DocuSign where you can sign things electronically. So, as we go through all of these pieces, we're working with the individuals to to, I guess it's more of a cultural change across the board to help them understand that there are all these capabilities out there and these, these various things from a technology standpoint that are here for them at their fingertips. And, it may not necessarily have always been the way that you did it, but it's a change in the culture, and it's making sure that people understand that this is security and this is our path forward, and it's the best thing for us all to do.
Any closing remarks you'd like to say, Brandy, before I push it over to Jerry?
Thank you very much. I've been excited to be here, and this has been a wonderful panel. So thank you, everyone.
Jerry, same question for you. What's your biggest challenge you think in the field these days?
I'll go back to the very beginning where I talked about, I think organizations as a whole, all the issues that Brandy talked about just now that people have, working remotely and that sort of thing. A lot of that can be stemmed off. It's just a lack of planning. It's just a lack of planning for these very disruptive events. So I think that is a huge challenge. Organizations need to understand that they need to plan for these things to happen. You're not going to have smooth computing 365 days a year. And when you don't have those days, weeks, or months where it's disrupted, how are you planning for that? I think underneath all that, as part of planning, is that organizations need to be more aggressive about designing security into their environment, right? So whether it's software development, you want to make sure that you're designing security into that software. Whether you're building networks, local networks, or using cloud service and that sort of thing, you want to make sure that you have a process that you're following that designs security into it, right? And so business continuity is no different. You're designing security into your business continuity planning. I think those are all major challenges that people understand and recognize. They just haven't figured out how to quite get their arms all around that. And I would say the final thing as it relates to risk management is prioritizations. People need to understand that priorities change in a risk management scheme, and don't be afraid to change your priorities and look at things from a probability standpoint. You can't cover risk on 100,000 different things. You have to look at the most likely, the most probable things that could happen and work from that perspective. And I think that we in the security community sometimes try to cover everything. You just don't have the money and the resources. So we need to get better about prioritization, not being afraid to change priorities, and having a good risk management strategy that's focused on probability of some disruptive event to critical assets.
Any closing remarks you'd like to throw in there, Jerry?
I think this is great. I always tell people just start with the basics. Go with the basics. Don't make things over complicated, because really at the end of the day, they're not that complicated. And to plan up front.
Thanks, Jerry. All right, Lucy, premier sponsor Red Hat, give you the last word.
Yeah, so I think kind of building on what Jerry said, that humans naturally have that tendency to devalue long-term risk, and then that plays out in things like when COVID comes out, you weren't necessarily built the infrastructure to deal with all of the changes that that you need, right? Like be able to handle all the increased VPN. How are you going to handle security, right? And so, because we're naturally used to fighting fires versus thinking more long-term, right? I think you should always have that attitude of not if, but when. Like you said, like we don't have infinite time, resources, people, staff, right? So you have to, be strategic about how you approach security, and also from realize that there is that convergence of IT and OT. There's assessments out there that show that OT networks are much more connected to IT networks and the internet than people realize. And so you got to kind of look at security on both sides like that. Thinking about many organizations are going to the cloud. What is that in terms of from a security standpoint? That has a lot of. It's important to look at what are some of the breaches that are happening in terms of cloud security related breaches. And if you look at some of the research out there, it's very interesting because, for example, Gartner says that 99% of cloud security failures are because of the customer's fault, right? And so this is the same idea, even in whether it's IT, OT, right? Again, it's the human problem. A lot of it is a human problem. So it's about the people, process, and not only the tools, but it's also products. It's not about buying products. It's about people, process, and the technologies, leveraging not the built-in technologies that you already have in your environment. Taking that inventory, what do you already have? Looking at what's causing some of these breaches out there, and what are some of these common human caused breaches. Common ones are like misconfigurations, right? Weak passwords, known vulnerabilities, that kind of thing. Having a strategy in place to deal with all of that. And then having a strategy to build security in from the start, all across the board, right? From the infrastructure operations to application development to security operations, looking at things like automation to be efficient with how you're doing application development, how you're doing infrastructure operation. We talked about SOAR, using automation to automate the security operations center, and then so that you have that repeatability and that consistency across the board. And then also the cross training is also really important. Like I said earlier, that one time I was at last year's panel. MasterCard was one of the keynote one of the keynote speakers, and what's his name? Yeah, it was John Brinke. Yeah. And so he was talking about the strategic pillar at MasterCard, and he has business security engineers. And the idea is that these are developers working with security teams and trained on security, and vice versa, right? He talked about like how, they went to, they have weekly lunch and learns, and they have things like that. And when I was USCIS did a similar thing, right? Adrian Monza, who leads security there, was doing a very similar thing, where this cross training, right? So that's another really important aspects as well. And then look at what other customers, what other agencies are doing, like the DoD, how they're doing DevSecOps, and how they're trying to do DevSecOps consistently across all of the DoD.
Any closing remarks there, Lucy, before I close this up and switch it back over to Leonardo?
Now, I was just going to say thank you to the attendees and to my co-panelists and to you, John, and that was really a lot of fun, and enjoyed it.
Yeah, I'd like to thank Brandy, Lucy, and Jerry for participating here, and all the questions that came out from the audience. I really appreciate everyone getting together here and doing this first panel. We have a bunch more that are coming up in the future with Howard County's Chamber. With that being said, I'd like to pitch it back over to Leonardo at the Chamber to any closing remarks or anything you'd like to say to close it up.
Yeah, well, first I want to just, again, thank all of our panelists for participating. Again, I think you've shared a ton of insights over this last hour or so. And so again, want to thank Lucy, Brandy, Jerry, as well as you, John, for again, all of sharing your insights. Also, as John alluded to, we do have some upcoming webinars over the next coming months. But again, first want to just acknowledge again and recognize our sponsors, which you see here on the screen, led by Red Hat, but certainly appreciate all of the support that has been lended to this effort, as well as also our committee, which has been led by Mike Finkel from SparkSoft. And so you'll actually be hearing from Mike on the fourth session of this series. But again, want to just acknowledge the committee that helped to organize and has been pulling this together. And so with that, Taylor, if you go to the next screen.
The one you sent me, this is the only slide.
Okay. Well, I wanted to, ultimately, I'll just encourage everyone to just go to the Chamber's website to see the future topics coming up in August, and then subsequently in October. And then we'll wrap things up in February of next year. And then from there, we'll be really speeding down the highway heading towards our 2021 cyber conference. But again, thank you all for joining us today. Thank again our sponsors and supporters, and have a great afternoon.